Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first online presentation of 2021. My name is Roberto Natalini. For those who don't know me, I am the program chair for the San Francisco Tour Guide Guild. And today we have interesting presentation about the Monterey Lower Presidio Historic Park. We have actually 3 guests today. I am going to introduce them very shortly, but I would like to again to ask you to please mute yourself as you sign in order to avoid any feedback. And also, I would recommend to use as view option on the top. You have different views option you can choose from. I would recommend to choose the who's talking. So you will be able to see our presenter, Tim Thomas, and his slides. You should be able to see his first slide already on the screen. But first of all, the first person that I'm going to introduce is going to be Inga Waite, representing the city of Monterey. The second person will be Bill Wojtkowski. I apologize, Bill, if I misspell your last name. He's representing the Old Monterey Foundation. And finally, our tour guide today and presenter will be Tim Thomas, who is an experienced historian and tour guide in the city of Monterey. And also, I would like to acknowledge our member, San Francisco Tour Guide Guild member, Allison Merrill, who made this event possible as well. Okay, so Inga, are you ready to give us a short presentation about this event?
Sure. So thank you so much, Roberto and Allison, for the invitation. It's a great honor to be presenting to the Guild today. So good afternoon. As Roberto explained, my name is Inga Waite, and I am the Library and Museums Director for the City of Monterey. As you know, Monterey has held a significant position in our region's Euro-American history. The Lower Presidio Historic Park is one of the richest historic sites on the West Coast, so we're delighted to be able to share information about it with you. The city of Monterey began leasing the area. It's about 26 acres, I believe in 1996, although Bill could correct me, so that the historic location could be managed, developed, and interpreted and open to the public. And I should say we lease it from the United States Army. So here's this very historic, richly historic piece of land. We're a small city with a small staff, and we want to make this resource available to everybody. But we have a small capacity. So how do we grow that capacity? Through partnerships. So we work with a local nonprofit, or we've been very lucky to have them work with us. It's the Old Monterey Foundation. And they have been a significant partner for us. Bill Wikowski is the former president of the Old Monterey Foundation, and he also is our former city head of planning for the city of Monterey. So he's going to tell you a little bit about the Old Monterey Foundation and why they took an interest in working with us on developing and interpreting and keeping this park accessible to everybody. And then he will introduce today's speaker and tour guide, Tim Thomas. So Bill, please take it away.
Thank you, Inga, and welcome all you tour guides. It's a beautiful day in Monterey. The Lower Presidio, as Inga said, is owned by the Army but leased to the city for 50 years at no cost. There was a plan done, I don't know, 15 years ago or so by the city and the Army about how to improve the Lower Presidio. and the city didn't have any money to do it, and that's where we stepped in, the Old Monterey Foundation. We are committed to preserving and enhancing the history of Old Monterey, the downtown and the adjacent areas. So we reviewed this plan, and we've raised millions of dollars and put in improvements. We took down the chain link fence. We set up a historic, these 2 trails. Not only is this one of the most historic areas in all California, it's one of the most scenic areas. You get an incredible view from both of our trails, the Harbor Trail and the Vista Trail. And we set up these ADA accessible trails, and we've done a wide selection of historic signs that talks about the history of the Lower Presidio, both in English and in Spanish. So we're very proud of what we're doing. Our next step, the old horse stables were just demolished by the city, and we want to build a replica of the other ones with a community building. So please go to our website, oldmontereyfoundation.org. If you have any questions, send me an email or give me a call. But we're very proud of not only the things we've done at the Lower Presidio, but in downtown Monterey. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Thomas, who's going to be the main presenter today. Tim, what can I say? He's an illustrious historian for the city of Monterey. He's a historian, he's an author, he's a consultant for the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I knew him first for 16 years of being the historian and the curator for the Maritime Museum, which is in Custom House Plaza. He's been featured on various TV programs like PBS and BBC. His latest claim to fame is setting up the Japanese American Heritage Center, which is in downtown Monterey, and he's worked extensively and traveled and lectured on that topic. So Tim is a very, very popular tour guide. He gives walking tours of Lower Presidio Park, the wharf, and the surrounding areas in Cannery Row. So take it away, Tim.
Well, if I can live up to that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for being part of this today. So I was thinking about this, and I've been given this tour for about 3 years or so now. And I thought the best way to do this tour is just sort of start where I usually start the tour. So this actually, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been up onto the Lower Presidio Historic Park when you come to Monterey. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you all do. It really is an important place. In fact, it used to be referred to as the Plymouth Rock of the West at one time or another. But this is at the front entrance as you first enter the park. The sign is new. This was also put in by the old Monterey Association to put this in. But let's just start at the beginning right here. Hang on for a second here. My slides aren't working here. All right, I gotta start, my thing's not working. Ah, there we go. So this is where I like to start my tours. This is the Presidio Museum that you see right here. This is actually a city museum. I actually was involved when they set this museum up. When I worked for the Maritime Museum, we were all part of this kind of organization to put this together called Historic Monterey. And I'll show it. And so I restart all my tours at this site here. But I'll show you the same. Here's what that same view looked like about 1908 or so. And here it is today, looking back about the same way right there. So this site is actually really important place. Every ethnic organization, every ethnic group that came to Monterey came to this part at one time or another. A good friend of mine, a historian of Santa Cruz, likes to say the Point Lobos, which is a beautiful state park in South Carmel, which I'm sure most of you have been to. I like to say the Point Lobos is the center of the universe, which I agree, but I like to say this is the center of the universe, this place right here. And this truly is where Monterey was born. Not just Monterey, but really California was really born on this very site right here. It was in 1602 when a guy by the name of Sebastian Vizcaíno, who I'll talk a little bit later here, was who arrived into Monterey. It was really the first European visitor that was here. It was in December of 1602, and he dropped his longboats into the water, and they rode through the harbor. And there's actually a little stream that runs right along this way here through the entrance, right into the Monterey Bay. And the bay used to run right up to the opening of this park at one time. And that little stream, by the way, although there's no water in it right now, but it's actually called the Winiprosa Creek today. But at that time, there was a lot of water running in that little creek, and he ran his longboats up that little stream, and then he was camped, we think, right about here, and he spent about 10 days here or so. And he talked about being visited every single day by the native people, the Indian people of Monterey. They did not have a village site here, but it was a very important place to the native people of Monterey, and you'll see that as we go along on this tour here. There was a village, we know at this time, this guy was here, that was way over here, Presidio Monterey, across from the Monterey Cemetery. The Monterey Peninsula College is there, and there was a large village site there at that point. This area was stretching all the way down to the Custom House Plaza, and the Monterey Wharf area was actually a sort of a fishing camp, what it was at that time. And this guy talked about being visited every day by the native people. Well, who were those native people? Well, the native people of Monterey, who I believe were the first commercial fishermen in Monterey, because that's really how they made their living, were the Rumsien people. Rumsien was the language they spoke. Now, perhaps you guys are more familiar with that word Ohlone. Ohlone is, in the world of words, Ohlone is a fairly new word, going back maybe 130 years or so. And Ohlone territory would have stretched from San Francisco Bay all the way along the coast down to about Point Sur. In Monterey, it was the Rumsien people, and that was the language they spoke. And we can trace the native culture into the Monterey area about 10,000 years or so. If you think about what Monterey may have looked like 1,000 years ago, or even just 500 years ago, it was around with lots of lakes, lots of fresh water, at least enough to sustain that population, because it was never that big. Huge herds of deer and elk and tule elk and grizzly bear. I have read accounts of early explorers coming into the Monterey area, especially in the fall months, talking about bird life. So many birds, they said, you couldn't see the surface of the little lakes. Said the ducks would darken the sky. Look onto that bay out there. It'd be so filled with seals and sea lions and stellar sea lions and sea otters. They actually thought the bay was paved. We go into the diaries that the Monterey Bay is like a brown cobblestone. Certain times of the year, waves would crash over each, pouring fish onto the beach. That's how abundant it was out there, which tells me there was never any real time of hunger for the Rumsien people. They got into the bay in these beautiful boats made out of tule, like this one right here. And tule are those big tall grasses, those reeds that grow along the wetlands. And they'll fish everything that's out there. They'll make beautiful little fish hooks out of abalone or mussel shell, make the fishing line out of a stinging nettle plant, use traps and baskets and spears and nets. And what I personally think is the absolutely coolest thing in the entire world is they were the first divers going to that bay. I mean, Monterey Bay today is the dive capital of the world. We take a walk along the Monterey waterfront, especially on the weekends, down by the Coast Guard Pier. That place would be filled with rubber people. But the Rumsien were the first divers going to that bay, and we know that because of burials come out of the ground in recent years. And you cannot build a house along the Monterey waterfront without running across a Rumsien burial or two. The males have what's known as surfer's ear, which is a little bony growth that goes in the opening of your ear. You're spending a lot of time in the cold water like the Monterey Bay. It makes a lot of sense, don't you think? You see an abalone the size of a hubcap, you're going to dive down there and get it. And abalone played a very important part of their life. They ate it. They used the shells to make tools like fish hooks and shovels and bowls. They used the shells to decorate baskets, to make jewelry, and they traded it to other California Indians for things they could not get here in Monterey, like obsidian, which is a volcanic rock, which they're using to make arrow points and spear points. And perhaps some of you have seen an old Kevin Costner movie called Dances with Wolves. Anybody remembers that movie? That's about Indians in South Dakota. If you watch that film closely, and it actually comes on cable TV all the time, so if you watch that film closely, you'll notice there's a lot of abalone in the clothing and the regalia that they're wearing. Well, as far as I know, there is no abalone in South Dakota. You've got to get there some way. It's going on those trade routes. A lot of it, in fact, most of it, starts right here in Monterey. Monterey literally was the abalone capital of the world. And abalone can be traced back to its point of origin. And they have found Monterey red abalone in hidden sites as far back as Minnesota. And here is the best part, is the word abalone, which really is universal, used all over the world today, come from the Rumsien people. And they had a word for the red abalone, which actually is the largest of the abalones, and the predominant abalone in the Monterey Bay. That word is Ohlone. Ohlone, and then linguists have traced that word abalone back to that word Ohlone that starts right here in Monterey. So let's go back. I want to take back this site again. So, which I think is interesting, is in the 1940s, a group of archaeologists, and there have been a number of digs on this site over the years, but in the 1940s, there were a number of archaeologists doing a dig on this site up here. And they came to this conclusion. They believe that this site was a place where visiting California Indian groups, when they came to Monterey, and it was pretty common, visiting other Indian groups would come to Monterey mainly to gather abalone, that they would stay at this site right here. And so in a sense, it was probably the first motel in California was this site right here. All right, so we'll move on. So let's go into the museum. And I usually take my groups into the museum. It's not open every day, but it is a city museum. It's completely volunteer driven. It's very small. And so those who are in the museum are very well educated about the museum and really can help you quite a bit. But one of the first things you'll see when you go into the museum will be this panel to represent the Rumsien people. And this is a drawing that was done in the 1790s and is credited to a guy named Jose Cordero. But what I think is interesting about the drawing, and it wasn't uncommon in those days for artists to actually copy other drawings. So this drawing actually is a copy of this drawing. This was referred to as the Monterey Woman, also done in about 1790. But what I think is interesting about the drawing is, if you notice Cordero's drawing here, of course, he made her look more European in this drawing than she looks here. She looks more realistic to me in this illustration. So we'll keep her here. And what I love about this drawing is it really show you their connection to the bay here. So the inner skirt that she's wearing would be made of tules. The outer skirt here is made of deer hide. These black spots you see here are abalone pendants. This cape that she's wearing is probably sea otter pelt. The necklace that she's wearing here is olivella shell, little sea snails. Then the earpiece she's wearing here, let's take a look at the close-up. This what she's wearing in her ear is this piece right here. Now I took this photograph a couple of years ago. I had the privilege of traveling to the British Museum in London. They took us to their warehouse, and this piece was collected here in Monterey in the 1790s by a pretty well-known British explorer by the name of George Vancouver. And you can see that's partly woven like a basket. At one time, there were acorn woodpeckers in that weave there, and then the large white beads are clamshell disc beads. Then the little white beads are olivella shell bead. There's some glass trade beads, abalone pendants here. Then this long piece, this is bird bone, and bird bone is hollow. And they create this design that we now call scrimshaw, and they'll use squid ink and mud to get that dark color. Then she'll wear it in her ear like you'd put a pencil back behind your ear. So you can see, again, she'd wear them as a pair on her ears right here. Then oftentimes, as they weave these beautiful baskets to weave into the basket, beautiful abalone pendants, clamshell disc beads, olivella shell bead. So the bay is very, very important to the Rumsien people here in Monterey. So here is, these are glass trade beads. These are from that time period. This is what Vizcaíno and other explorers would have had with them when they came in, and they would have traded these for all kinds of different kinds of things. And these came off a shipwreck. Actually, these are typical trade beads of that time period. And then here's our Monterey Woman today. This is my good friend Linda Yamane. Linda is a Rumsien descendant and the world's leading scholar on the Rumsien people. She's been researching Rumsiens for the last 35 years or so. She's brought back language, songs, stories. She is the first Rumsien Ohlone basket weaver in probably 150 years. She's the first basket weaver to make a feather basket, Ohlone feather basket in probably 250 years. This is one of Linda's baskets that she made about 10 years ago or so. Again, these are all of Ella shell beads that she made, abalone pendants here, and then the red feathers. These historically would have been acorn woodpecker feathers, but she can't get acorn woodpecker feathers, so she actually had to use chicken feathers, and then use dyes, real special dyes. It took a long time to experiment to get that bright red color. So those of you who live in the Bay Area, you can go to the Oakland Museum and see one of Linda's baskets they have on exhibit there today. And also at the Presidio Museum in San Francisco also has one of Linda's baskets on exhibit there today. Very important what she's doing for her today. So we'll continue to go on to the museum here. This is a wonderful model of the ship called the San Diego. So anybody here know where Monterey may have gotten its name? In 1602, a guy by the name of Sebastian Vizcaíno was on a mission from Spain to sail along this California coast to find safe ports for those big galleons returning from the Philippines. If you know that Manila galleon trade story, 1565, Spain finds a route that takes them across to the Pacific from Mexico, running right in the middle of Manila Bay. When they got to Manila, Manila was like this gigantic Walmart, had all this really cool stuff from Japan, stuff from China, stuff from the Spice Islands, stuff those guys really wanted to have. And they had all the silver and gold from Mexico that those guys wanted to have. So they began trading, but they had to find a way to come home because you couldn't come back the same way they came because they're fighting these currents. Took a couple of years, but eventually found that this route that pushed them across the Pacific is actually a series of currents that pushed them across the North Pacific. Comes out somewhere near Cape Mendocino, turned right, set on the California coast, eventually ending up in Mexico. Well, this trip can be very dangerous. It can take weeks, sometimes like months. There's storms, there's diseases, there's scurvy, and scurvy was an awful thing. They had to find safe ports, guys stop and make repairs and take on fresh supplies and fresh water, just rest. That was this guy in his job. He was out there, there's such a ship called the Caravel. That's who this guy is right here, a Caravel, which is a little galleon designed just to sail along coastlines. It sails along this California coast, comes into Monterey Bay in December of 1602, had an absolutely beautiful day, or he would have missed this place altogether. As I mentioned earlier, he dropped his longboats into the harbor, rolled through the harbor, sailed up that little creek, and it's camped right in front of this very museum right here. I spent about 10 days here, loved this place. He named it after his sponsor, the Count de Monterey, which I thought pretty smart on his part, because you're supposed to name any newly discovered land after a saint, right? San Diego? No, he named the guy that was paying his bills. He wanted to settle Monterey then, wanted to be named governor. But Spain had some other issues. They had some war issues and they had some financial issues. So they backed off a little bit. In fact, it took them close to 170 years to get back here. But imagine for those Rumsien families, and you wake up one morning, you walk out of your little Thule house, and you look onto that bay out there, and you see some ships the size of a whale, like having a UFO laying in your backyard. Well, the Rumsien people had a story they used to tell about a whale that swallows a man. The story goes, the whale was swimming from Southern California to Monterey. When it passes Santa Barbara, it swallowed this man. Well, when the whale continued swimming north, when close to Monterey, the whale began to feel sick. The closer to Monterey the whale got, the sicker he got. Finally, the whale comes to the harbor. He is feeling so sick that he spits down on the beach there near today's Monterey Wharf. When he swallowed that man in Santa Barbara, the man was brown. But when he spit on the beach here in Monterey, the man is white. And that's how white people came to Monterey. But if you think about the story for a minute, you see a ship here the size of a whale that's spitting out white and longboats onto your beach. It makes perfect sense. So here's a wonderful painting, also in a museum that I love. This was done in 1880, and here's the Presidio. Here's where that sign is. I showed you on the first slide how you enter the park today. This white cross here represents where supposedly Sebastian Vizcaíno and then 169 years later, Winifred Serra all held mass under when they first arrived in Monterey, which I'll talk about later in the tour here. And then where the museum and all that stuff is right about here, that space right here. And then you see this road here. Again, if you know Monterey at all, this is today the Monterey bike and walking trail that you can walk all from Monterey all the way down to the Monterey Bay Aquarium and beyond. Right there, this little bridge you see right here crosses over the little Serra Creek. As I mentioned, though, there was a lot of water running through that. At one time in the 19th century, the city of Monterey actually built an aqueduct and redirected that little river to run towards the Monterey Wharf so they could resupply visiting ships with fresh water at one time right there. And then the beach you see right here, which is not there anymore, but when the Hotel Del Monte was opened in 1880, same year this painting was done, and the Hotel Del Monte was a very fancy railroad hotel, actually built by Charles Crocker. At one time, it was the fanciest hotel in the world, and people would come from the East Coast and spend like 3 or 4 months in Monterey. And they would have beach pavilions here, and people would come and spend the days on the beach here and swim in the 55-degree Monterey Bay right there. In 1887, the Southern Pacific came in. They were actually here in 1880, but in 1887, they extended a line from Monterey into Pacific Grove, mainly because they had a sand plant there. And so they came in and blasted all this out with dynamite. Chinese laborers did all that and really changed the coastline here. And today, if you walk along that trail, it's all landfill now that does that. But when they did that, as you can see from the painting, the bay actually ran right up to the big opening of that park right there. But once the Southern Pacific came in and blasted that out, they cut off that there. But also there was a very active Monterey whaling industry here beginning in the 1850s, and the whalers would bring their whales onto this beach right here. They were Portuguese men from the Azores, and they were what's called shore whalers. And so they would push off every morning from the beach here and row or south to their whaling grounds, hunt their whales, mostly grays and humpbacks, and then come home at night. So they weren't out on those 3-, 4-, and 5-year whaling cruises. They could come home every night and do that. And here is a photograph of these guys processing a whale on that beach right there. As I mentioned, they're getting mostly grays and humpbacks. And this is an interesting photograph. So they would bring them in. Of course, once they hunted the whale, and they killed the whale using different kinds of tools. And I won't go into the history of whaling here. We'll never get done with this tour. But once they kill the whales, usually the whale will sink, and they'll put markers out there and will float back to the surface about 10 days later. So imagine how that smelled at that point. And then they would go back out to get it. Usually took 2 boats and tie a rope around his tail and tow it back to that beach right there. And then the flenser, the guy who makes the cuts on the whale, that's the guy you see here, would then go and make the cuts on the whale. You can see it's wrapped up in ropes and cable, but then run that cable through this eye hook. This is still in those rocks, running under that beach right there today, but run that cable through this eye hook into a block and tackle on the beach, big block and tackle apparatus, and they turn that block and tackle, and then the whale is still in the water, and the blubber comes off like a big orange peel. So then all they were getting, as I mentioned, grays and humpbacks, and all they wanted was the blubber. Didn't want the parts of these dead whales, so they didn't tow them back out into the bay. And the currents, being what they are here in Monterey, just pushed the carcass of that dead whale onto the beach we now call Del Monte Beach. Here's a painting of Del Monte Beach from 1874. By the way, the Presidio's over here. You can see the railroad coming in. That's the Monterey Salinas Valley Narrow Gauge, which was a locally owned railroad. They were bought out in 1880 by the Southern Pacific. Now you can see the beach here, all little whalebone. Actually see some whaleboats in the water here too. And now you got a beach full of dead whale. What else do you think you're going to get down there? Sure didn't smell very good, that's for sure. big giant grizzly bears, kind of these hills, go feed off the carcass of these dead whales because grizzly bears love to eat whale. And I have read accounts of people who lived in Monterey in those days, and they said at night, you hear the grizzly bears walking through their neighborhood. So ever hear anybody around here complaining about raccoons getting in their garbage? Forget it. So let's leave the museum. And again, I recommend if you bring a group down here, you should take them into that museum and let them walk around. It's a wonderful little museum. They really focus on the military history. This is a photograph looking back onto the museum. This was taken in the 1920s. So this actually, the museum actually originally started out life as an artillery building right there. And then these are those stables that Bill had mentioned right here. And then we'll walk out the building, the museum will go down the stairs here and then go behind the museum. And the old days, I used to take my visitors up the hill, straight up here to the slope monument. But now they built the little walkway. By the way, Bill, I didn't know they had names. Then they would go along this way. And they're wonderful all the way up to the top. And there, as Bill mentioned, beautiful views up there. And they're nice, they have interpretive panels all the way up. This is one of those interpretive panels actually that goes all the way up there. But again, here's a close-up of those horse stables that you see right here. It was for the cavalry, of course. That was at the Presidio there. And of course, now you got horses. Horses create a lot of manure. And of course, manure creates lots of flies. And the flies become such an issue around the turn of the 20th century, especially for all the merchants in downtown Monterey, which isn't very far from here. And the fact the flies were such a problem that all the merchants got together and they created this little contest. And for those who could kill the most flies, they'd win a prize. I'm not sure what the prize was, but I'd like to find out sometime. So we'll continue along our walk up the trail. And so we'll see this interpretive panel. And these are the guys that actually built those stables and built that artillery building. These guys are the guys who built that Presidio, the original part of the Presidio. These are Buffalo soldiers. Of course, Buffalo soldiers are African American. These guys came here directly from the Philippines in 1903. They were part of the Spanish-American War over there. What's interesting to me about these guys is a lot of these guys actually married Filipino women, and they brought their wives with them. And so we believe that the first Filipinos that come to California were with these guys, or the wives of these guys here. Now, I don't think anybody looking at this photograph, you can tell where this photograph is taken, because I'll tell you, these guys are not allowed to live at the Presidio. They didn't stay on that side. They actually live offside of the Presidio ground. I don't know if you can guess where this picture was taken, but if we could step off the ground to our right here today, the Monterey Bay Aquarium would be right over here. And so this would be David Avenue today. Here, there's a Chinese fishing village at this time. In 1903, this picture was taken right across the street from these guys here. And today is an Andronico's market. Right here, that's where this picture was taken today. And there's a building on just a couple blocks from here that's still there today, called Mariposa Hall, and it's where these guys would go to take food, to get fed, and they would take recreation there. So they were here for a few years to do this, to build the Presidio. And then a lot of these guys were sent up into the beginnings of the national parks and became and guided the national park system up there. So we'll go up to the top of the hill right here, and I apologize, I didn't take a picture when I got up there, but you'll get up there, you can tell from the top of the hill. It has incredible views of the Monterey Bay. And you'll see some pictures as we go along here. But the whole point of getting up there, of course, is to see the slope monument, which actually finally was put in 1910. This picture was taken probably early on, after the turn of the 20th century. These are all probably taken on the 4th of July or on the July 7th. These are all members of the Native Sons of the Golden West. So if you know anything about the Sloat story, I'll give you a little history in the Commodore Sloat story, of course. Is this for California, really how we got California. And so I want you all to hearken back to your high school history classes. And remember that term, manifest destiny, from sea to shining sea. So the United States always had its eye on California. So, of course, California initially was part of the Spanish Empire. Then in 1822, Mexico declares independence from Spain, and we become part of Mexico. And then California and the United States, hey, we like California. So we, in 1846, we sort of start this little war down there on the Rio Grande, and we go to war with Mexico. At that time, the Commodore of the Pacific always had standing orders that if we went to war with Mexico, that you would sail into Monterey and take the town of Monterey, primarily because Monterey was the capital, northern capital for Mexico at that time. Well, at that time, the commander of the Pacific was a guy named John Drake Sloat. And so Sloat heard these rumors late in June of 1846 that, yes, we were at war with Mexico. He wasn't sure. He didn't have email and he didn't get CNN. But he set his ships sail, heading towards Monterey, came into the harbor on the 1st of July, 1846, but again was a little leery because he wasn't sure, because it was just a few years earlier when the then commander of the Pacific, guy named A.P. Catesby Jones, heard that same rumor. He'd gone to war with Mexico, brought his ships into Monterey, and he immediately sent his Marines in, raised the flag over the custom house, and took the town of Monterey. Then to find out the next day that we weren't at war with Mexico and had to give the town back. It was kind of an embarrassing thing, not only for Commander Jones, but also for the United States. So Jones was a little nervous about it, but finally was convinced by a guy named Thomas Larkin. Thomas Larkin was a citizen of Monterey, was a merchant, and also was the consul to Mexico, the only one we ever had in Monterey at that time. He convinced them, yes, we were at war with Mexico. And on July 6th or July 7th, 1846, Jones sent his Marines in, and they raised the American flag over that custom house, which is right in front of, by the way, of the Presidio Park. And Monterey, along with thousands of acres of the West, became a part of the United States. Of course, we did have a war to contend with that went on for a few years, but eventually they all settled that in 1848, and it was all ended up part of the United States at that point. And by the way, I should mention the Custom House, although you don't know, the Custom House is now part of California State Parks, but the Native Sons of the Golden West, which is a fraternal organization. They still operate today. In fact, I believe their headquarters are in San Francisco. They have a museum there, I know, and they had a sort of an office in the Custom House. They owned the Custom House at the turn of the 20th century at that time as well. And by the way, the Custom House is now part of California State Parks in the state landmark #1, which I thought was a really big deal. And then I talked to a state park person and they told me, well, it wasn't that big of a deal because the numbers are just randomly picked. And so I was kind of disappointed. But it's a very important building. It's actually the oldest government building in California. It was built, we think, sometime between 1822 and 1827. We're not really sure when it was actually built right there. So just quickly about the Sloat Monument, the idea of it was hatched in 1896, the 50th anniversary of the Sloat landing. And so they had this idea to build this, and it's very symbolic. And I won't go into the whole history of the symbolism of it, and it's very confusing. But I can tell you that it takes up about 50 square feet of property, because it was the 50th anniversary of the Golden Jubilee of it all. And then this is just the base of it you see here as building it. And each block here is 4 feet long, and because that's supposed to represent how long a seaman, a sailor, would stand watch on a ship. That's the whole part of it. But this is what the Sons of the Golden West actually. These are, you can see it barely on here, and I'll show you some pictures. But they actually put in names of who they felt were prominent California citizens that they felt should have their names on the blocks. And also, and of course, they're all men, white men. And actually, one of them right about here actually is the name John Sutter, is right there. Sutter was a signer of the California Constitution, actually, in 1849. So I thought Sutter was an interesting character. Sutter, of course, was Swiss, and came to the United States. He left Switzerland because he owed a lot of money and abandoned his family, abandoned his debtors, ended up in the Sacramento Valley, and he opened a little station there, but he really made a lot of money. He would send his men into the Sacramento Valley, and they would literally kidnap Indian children, and they would sell these children to work as indentured servants to rich folks in San Francisco and other parts of California. Of course, and then it was Sutter, on Sutter's James Marshall was working for Sutter, who discovered gold in 1848 up along the American River. He's building, of course, the sawmill. And of course, Sutter didn't own that property at that time. And so he wanted to claim all that property and keep it all quiet, but he had to claim the property. Before he had to come to Monterey to do that, because Monterey was the government, where the government was. Monterey, that was the headquarters for California at that time. And so he sent the guy down with the gold. At the time, the man had, the government agency had its offices in the Thomas Larkin property there, and the American soldier who talked to him was, of course, a guy named William Tecumseh Sherman, who became a very famous Civil War general. And he took that piece of gold. Yay, that's gold, but you can't claim all that property. That's Indian property. And so he wasn't able to claim that property. And we learned that quickly, especially in Monterey, that gold was discovered, and we took off for the gold fields. Of course, Monterey literally went to sleep. It was referred to in the Preston days as Rip Van Winkle Town, the town that went to sleep. They also work with all the counties in California, and each county would put in a block for the base right here. And so, and not only did they put the block in, but each county would use the geology that was available to them. So this is made for all kinds of different rock work. And so it's sort of not only is a history, it's a geological history of California as well. So here is a picture of the opening of the slow landing. This was taken in 1910. That's how long it took. It took over 10 years to raise the money to finally get this thing going up there. Everybody in Monterey County showed up for the opening of this thing. And if you can look on the right there, you'll see that little pier back there. That is the pier for the Associated Oil Company. And they used to pipe oil from Coalinga, California, all the way to Monterey. And then there are two big oil tanks. You can't see them in this picture, but they're down below, if you know Monterey, near the Coast Guard, where the Coast Guard pier is today. And those big oil tanks are actually open at the top. And on September 14th, 1924, they're hit by lightning and they exploded. And the whole part of that bay was on fire for 3 days. And it was Monterey fishermen literally saved the Monterey Wharf. And the Monterey Fire Department and all the Pacific Oak Fire Department are all there trying to put out the fire. And there were firemen and soldiers from the Presidio went down there to fight that fire. There were a couple of them died, Private Bolio and a Private Watkins. So if you go on to the Presidio here, you'll see there are roads named after those two guys, Private Bolio Road, Private Watkins Road. There's also a guy named, also Sergeant Beans, who also died. Sergeant Beans, though, was a dog. Unfortunately, they didn't name anything after Sergeant Beans. I think they should, actually. So here's a picture. Now, why don't you take a look? Here it is. I took, whoops, wrong way. Uh-oh. I went the wrong way here. I'm sorry. Hang on for a second. I pushed the wrong button. I have to go back to the up to it. Sorry. It won't take me that long. But I'm not very technical. I don't even drive a car. All right, so we're gonna go. Don't pay attention to that stuff. There you go. Almost there. Okay. I did this once before.
It's okay, Tim. Don't worry. In the meantime, as you go back to your slide, I will remind everyone to write questions that they might have for Tim on the chat box.
So here we are. This is where I wanted to go to. So here's the picture today. And again, you can see these panels along the side, and you can also see how some of these are held up better than others. Again, it's the type of rock that they were using. But I want you to look at this. Look at the again. This is all very symbolic. Like the base here the base here, and then this part is actually supposed to be 13 feet high to represent the 13 stripes on the American flag. But if you look at this, it looks kind of funny. The eagle, to me anyway, it looks out of place. It doesn't look right to me, and that's because the eagle, that's not what was supposed to be there. This is what they had planned originally. This is what they sold that whole monument on. This is what the Sons of Native Gold of the West raised money on. It was supposed to be this guy right here. This is an 11-foot size bronze sculpture of John Drake Sloat right here, pointing towards the custom house. And then you can see the cannons along here. And it was all very special. And they hired an artist in San Francisco to produce this. And they raised a lot of money to do this. They produced these beautiful brochures that had this image on it. This was a maquette of the sculpture that was going to be there. And they raised a lot of money. It was very expensive to do this. And the studios in San Francisco, in April of 1906, I know you guys all know, a massive earthquake and fire hit San Francisco, destroys much of San Francisco, including the artist's studio, destroys his sculpture of John Drake Sloat. Of course, the Native Sons of the Gold of the West did not have enough money to have them redo it again, and they couldn't go around and raise money all over again. It's just going to take too long. And the artist looking around, and he said, well, I got this eagle. And that's how the eagle ends up on the top of that statue there. So here's a look close up of the panels, a couple of panels. There's Walter Colton. Walter Colton, of course, was a Navy chaplain who arrived in Monterey about a week after Sloat arrived. Walter Colton came aboard the USS Congress with John Stockton, and Colton was left here in Monterey. Also, a number of Sloat's men were left here as well. And Colton was appointed what they call the alcalde, kind of the mayor and judge of the town. He was from the East Coast, and he thought, and by the way, Monterey at that time was the Wild West. I mean, it literally was the Wild West. I mean, on every corner there was a saloon, there was some gambling establishment. It was a tough place. And Walter Colton was a chaplain. He was from the East Coast. He thought every community should have, but he's also a pretty progressive thinker, but he thought every community should have sort of a community building. And so he raised money by taxing these saloons and gambling places, and the guys who got arrested, that he arrested, he would charge them money, and he was able to build what they call Colton Hall, where eventually the California Constitution was drafted in 1848, and in the fall of 1848, it was in September and October. And they signed that Constitution in October of 1849, actually. And Monterey, by the way, was never the capital of California when this was part of the United States. That's one of the great myths about Monterey. It was, of course, the capital was part of Mexico and Spain, but it was never part of the capital when it was part of the United States. And that was partly because those guys didn't want it to be. When they signed that Constitution in 1849, they went to San Jose, and then they went to Benicia, then they went back to San Jose, and eventually goes to Sacramento. So, but if you know Monterey, there's actually a shopping center not too far from here that we call Del Monte Shopping Center. Well, that piece of property where Del Monte Shopping Center is today, it's been open until about 1969 with the idea that they would bring the state capital back to Monterey, and that's where they would put it. But luckily, they never did that. And so here is another one of those panels. That's Thomas Larkin. Thomas Larkin was another interesting guy. As I mentioned, he was a merchant in Monterey, also the U.S. consul here at Monterey, only one we ever had here. I always think Mr. Larkin's story is also very interesting because he was a pretty smart guy. But when Larkin was about 30, he was still living at home with his mom and dad in Boston. And mom and dad said, you know, Thomas, you know, maybe you should go out on your own. You know, you're getting kind of old there. You know, and so, you know, he drove Thomas Kell a couple of plans. His first plan, he wanted to become a postmaster. In those days, you could apply to the government to get a license to be a postmaster. So he did that, and he applied for a license. They didn't give him one, so that didn't work out. So his second plan was to marry a rich woman. Well, that wasn't going to work out either. So mom and dad, actually his dad was his stepdad, said, you know, Thomas, we're going to send you to California, to Monterey, with your stepbrother, John Rogers Cooper, who was a sea captain, had a store, and you're going to go work for your brother. So we put Thomas on a ship in Boston, set sail to California, to Monterey. Well, in those days, it took about 6 months to get to California. And on this board ship, he meets a young woman by the name of Rachel Hobbs. They're about the same age. And in those days, there wasn't a whole lot of things to do on those ships. And so they did what any young couple would do. And she got pregnant on that trip to California. Unfortunately for them, Rachel was on her way to California to meet up with her sea captain husband. But luckily for Rachel, her husband died on their trip to California, on the way to California, and actually left her a lot of money. And they got married, Thomas and Rachel, and he did end up marrying a rich woman. And they did settle in Monterey. In the 1830s, to live in Monterey, you really need to speak Spanish, which Thomas Larkin learned to do. Rachel never did. And he built this house, and his house is unusual because it's not made of adobe. And he was so proud of his house that he actually had an artist come and paint this whole painting of the whole town of Monterey just so he could show off his house, because it really stands out in the painting. But what he would do is he would loan money to all the ranchers. So the Californios in Monterey, they need their money raising cattle, right? They need their money. Anybody read 2 years before the Mass, Richard Henry Dana's book, which I highly recommend if you haven't, which is all about the hide and tallow trade. That's what that's all about. She would loan them money for those ships to come in. So that Thomas Larkin was very trustworthy with the Mexican government, and he was brought into all kinds of different meetings and things like that. Of course, here's the California Republic. Again, you can see how some of these stones do not hold up very well. This is, of course, honor Charles Fremont in his little insurrection up there in Sonoma. And I love this, the California bear flag that they made, and what they used to call the pig flag, because the bear looked like a pig right there. And then here's San Francisco County, February 15th, 1850. That's when San Francisco County was incorporated. And then there's the date, July of 1896. That's, of course, the 50th anniversary, the Golden Jubilee of the slow landing. Then I put this one up because I've been giving this tour for a few years, and just recently some kid is on the tour came up to me and asked me, well, how come this thing, look at the panel, how come it's misspelled? And I never noticed it before. I mean, yes, of course, they left out the E on this one right here. So I guess it's not a typo, it's more of a chisel-o, I guess, because they chisel that right in there. And then, of course, there is the front end of that. Again, you can see how these actually look pretty good right here. Eventually, again, the Old Monterey Association and the City of Monterey do hope to raise enough money to repair all that rockwork that's on here. And I often think about that, if they had put that statue of Sloat up here, all these people would be hanging off the arm of every high school kid in Monterey County would hang off the arm of Mr. Sloat right there. So let's go up. This is just above the monument right there. This was known as Fort Mervine, the first American fort on the property. This is just right above where the monument is. And Mervine was an officer with Sloat aboard the USS Savannah, which was Sloat's ship. And he built the first American fort. This is what it looked like right there. Here is a photograph of looking over where the fort is. This is it today. The cannon is not a cannon that was at the fort, but it is typical of a cannon he would have had there at that time. And yes, if this cannon were to work, it could fire into the bay at one time. And of course, you had great views of the bay right there. And we'll continue down that little hill a little bit. Again, you can see those wonderful views of the bay. You can see the property right here. But I want you to take a close look up at the ground right here. So here is a little close-up of the ground. This is all over the park. So if you look at the ground, you can see how dark it is. And the further you go along the park, it gets darker and darker. And look at all the abalone shell. This is all abalone shell that you see here. This is also referred to as abalone pavement. This is midden soil. And this shows us human use of this land right here for thousands of years. So we'll continue down the little hill right here, and you'll run across this rock right here, the granite rock, Loco Hill. This is what you'll see here. This again is Rumsien. We're really not sure what it was for. The city of Monterey likes to refer to it as a ceremonial rock, but it's also called a rain rock, also called a fertility rock. But the truth is, we don't know what it was for. But you can see the little indentation, little cupolas are all right in here, right here. Of course, ceremonies were very important to the Rumsien people, actually important to all of us today. And the Rumsien people had lots of dances, songs. They had songs for hunting, songs for dances, and songs for gambling, songs for fishing. But they also had a song to get rid of the fog, which I think is the greatest thing in the whole world, right? And if you are a Rumsien fisherman, want to go out in that bay for abalone or Ohlone or anything else out there, you want it to be a nice, beautiful day. As I'm sure you guys know, Monterey isn't always like that. So they actually have a song that they would sing to get rid of the fog. Here's that fog coming in. So I'm not going to sing it for you, right? But so knowing I was going to do this tour today, I got into my time machine this morning. I went back in time and I recorded them singing that song. So I hope this does what it's supposed to do. And what that song is saying in Rumsien is telling fog to go home beyond the bay out there, because Tug is out there and he is beating your wife. He's flying through the fog. All right. So we'll go down the hill. We've passed the parking lot. This is down lower into the park here. Again, now you can see the harbor here, wharf number 1 right here, wharf number 2 back right over there. And as we continue on the park here, you'll run across this guy, this wonderful sculpture of Father Renipro Serra. This was actually donated to the city of Monterey in 1906 by Jane Stanford, Stanford University, right? Her husband Leland Stanford, the Big Four, Charles Crocker. She donated this to the city of Monterey. The Stanfords were not Catholic, actually they were Protestant. It was not put in as a religious thing. They actually donated it to the city because they felt that Renipro Serra was a pioneer of California. I must tell you, though, that the statue was not here at this part initially, but initially was put in at the entrance to the park where that sign is when we first came in, that I first showed you. And after a short period, the city moved it because they were concerned of vandals. Now, this is made of granite. I mean, this weighs a ton, a couple of tons. And so that in order to move this, they actually had to build little tracks with what they call a donkey engine, a steam donkey engine, pull it all the way up the little hill to get it to where you see it today. And then a couple of years ago, when the city of Monterey, when the Catholic Church was making Renipro Serra a saint, that was a very controversial thing. And somebody came in the middle of the night and actually cut his head off with a cement saw, because it was a very clean cut. And it was missing for a few years. And I kind of liked it better without the head. I thought it was kind of interesting, and I thought it was a good way for the city to make money, because they could have people go up there and they could put their head there where Renipro Serra's head was supposed to be, so they get their picture taken like they're Renipro Serra. But anyway, so you didn't go for that. Some kid actually found the head. It was actually dumped in the harbor, and they had it cleaned, and they actually had it reattached to the sculpture, and there it is right there. And then you can see a wonderful picture of the harbor here. There's wharf number 1, again, wharf number 2. Wharf, and there's always been a wharf there since about 1845. Thomas Larkin actually built the first wharf in Monterey. I won't go to the history of the wharf right here. And then this wharf Wharf number 2 was built in 1926 as a support to the Monterey sardine fishery, and it's still referred to by a lot of old timers in Monterey as the New Wharf. You see right here, but also in Monterey, it was this site right here is these two sites right here, only place in California where there was ship-to-shore cannon fire, and that happened in November of 1818 when a privateer by the name of Hippolyte Bouchard, and I don't know if you know the difference between a pirate and a privateer. A privateer, it has papers essentially from a government allowing him to go out and do pirate things. That's how most governments got navies. And that's how Hippolyte Bouchard, who was a French privateer, he actually worked as a privateer initially for the United States government in the War of 1812, and then ended up in Argentina after that, and was hired by the Argentinian government who wanted to declare their independence from Spain. And so they hired him to be his privateer. And he has outfitted with a ship called the La Argentina, and his plan at that time was to sail to the entrance of Manila Bay and capture all those Spanish galleons. Well, when he got to Manila Bay, it was towards the end of the whole Manila Galleon thing, and there weren't a lot of the Manila Galleons leaving, so he wasn't getting anything out of it. So he thought he should rethink his plan. So he went to the Sandwich Islands, now the Hawaiian Islands, and while he was there, he meets up with a guy named Peter Cornet. Peter Cornet was an English radical and actually been with Napoleon. And Cornet had been to Monterey a couple of years earlier and actually wanted to stay in Monterey. And the Spanish government wouldn't let him stay here because he wasn't Spanish, he wasn't Catholic. And so he ended up also in the Sandwich Islands. And he tells them about Monterey, how important it is to the Spanish government. So they hatched this plan to come and take Monterey. They need another ship. Luckily for Bouchard, there was a ship that had been mutinied called the Santa Rosa. They take that ship. They need a crewman, so they man that ship. So they actually employ about 100 native Hawaiians, and they set sail for Monterey. Luckily, those native Hawaiians, they had to train those native Hawaiians on their sail from Hawaii to California. But as they were making this plan while they're still in Hawaii, they're overheard by somebody who actually lived in California. It wasn't uncommon for people to travel to Hawaii in those days. So he was leaving 6 weeks before those guys did. He sailed back to California and said, hey, these guys are coming. So they knew in Monterey they were on their way here. They arrived in Monterey in November of 1818. Bouchard did, and Cornet. It was a beautiful, hot, sunny day that we get sometimes what we call an Indian summer that we get in these fall days. There was no wind, and their plan was to sail their ships in, flying an American flag, claiming they were damaged. They think they'd be more sympathetic if they were American. Can you take us in so we can get some repairs? And they were going to come in and take the town. Well, they knew who they were, and the Spanish had set up gun emplacements right about here and some on the beach next to the wharf. Cornet brought his ship in about here, and Bouchard stayed off there about that direction. And they began this negotiation back and forth. And the government, Spanish government said, get off the ship. And they were saying, I'm not getting off the ship, going back and forth. Then dawn the next day, for a reason no one ever explained to me, Cornet began to fire his cannons onto the Presidio here, and they began to fire their cannons back, and also from the beach here. But he was essentially a sitting duck out there. It didn't last very long. Cornet raised his white flag and surrendered. No one was killed in this battle, but people were hurt. And then again, this day-long battle going back and forth. The truth is, the Spanish were concerned because they could see Bouchard's ship out there. They weren't going to go in there and get those guys. And so at night, everybody in Monterey left. They went inland towards Salinas, and Bouchard brought his longboats in, picked up the crew of the Santa Rosa, then backed his ship up to what we now call, we think, we're not really sure, but we think to present-day Cannery Row. There's a beach there we call Mcafee Beach today, but in the late 19th century on maps it's referred to as the Beach of Insurgents. We think we unloaded there, and they marched up through Monterey, up above that hill that we were just on where the monument is. And there's a wonderful description in one of the diaries that was with Bouchard about these 100 naked Hawaiians charging down that hill to take the town of Monterey. So they took the town of Monterey, they raised the Argentinian flag. Because Bouchard was Catholic, he wouldn't go into any of the churches. But then there was nothing in the churches to take because the priest took everything out of those, and the church went into Carmel Valley with all the native people. They spent about 10 days here, repaired the ships, got a lot of fresh water, tried to burn the town down, learned that adobe didn't burn very well, and then continued down to Southern California, tried the same thing in Santa Barbara with the same results. Eventually is back in Argentina, where today Bouchard is a national hero in Argentina. There are songs and books and stories and schools named after him, all kinds of things in Argentina. So here is a cross. This is actually a little here, right here. And I'll look close up here. You can see it says Alexo Nino. That's what it says on there. Oh, it's kind of fading now. Alexo Nino was an African who came to Monterey with the Niprosera aboard the San Carlos. He died here. He died of scurvy. He's not buried where this cross is, but he is buried somewhere here in Monterey, probably somewhere on this site. We don't know where he is buried right here, but that's why this cross is here. That's what it represents right there. We think he is the first African to be buried in California, and he is right there. That cross right there. This is where the Spanish fort was along that site there, the El Castillo that they call it there. Then we'll go down the hill a little bit on that part there, and you can see the ground, and we'll close up there. You can see the abalone shell, again, the midden site here, how important it is. As I mentioned, this belongs to the Army, and the Army has an archaeologist, and gophers push all this stuff up, and they're concerned about this. They're concerned about amateur archaeologists sneaking into the property. In fact, a few years ago, there was some doing this and taking pieces, because there's not just abalone pieces, but arrowheads, other things will come up. And so they're concerned about that. They want to cap all this property, but they're too concerned about the gophers and the ground squirrels. And I said, heck, just cap the damn property. So if you walk it, you'll see this. These are more mortar and pestle here. These are big mortars. These, or actually we know these are for, and this is what's left, but probably where these are right up against the fence. And the highway, and the road is right next to the fence right there. And the Monterey Tunnel is right next to this, where this is right here. And so there's probably lots of these. Usually you'd find these in groups. And this is used to grind not just acorn. Acorn was very important. Californians used all over California. They probably did grind acorn. A lot of oak trees on this property at one time. But also they probably were grinding other things in these rocks right here. Women would have done that. And so you can see there's more than one right there. Here's the other one that you see right here. But as I said, there were probably lots of them here at one time, and lots of women were working this land, working these mortars right there. And they were here because they were close to the bay and close to the oak trees. So they're grinding acorns. They're probably also grinding seashells, things like that. Also, so we'll go down the hill, down this little fence line, back to where we started, where that sign was. This is where they supposedly held. This is the site. This is a painting that was done in the 1870s to sort of a romantic idea of what it looked like when Mcafee held mass, supposedly under the same oak tree that Vizcaíno held mass under 169 years earlier. You can see the Indian people here, and then the soldiers right here. But I like the painting because you can see the Mariposa Creek running into the bay there, and the bay right here, and then the ship, the Santa Rosa, that's supposed to be the San Carlos, right there. So here is that same site today, right here. This Celtic cross is here. So this is where that statue of Niprosera was initially, and then they moved it up on the hill about 1907 or so, and so they replaced it with this Celtic Crawl. So why a Celtic Crawl? Because this was paid for and put in by a guy named Irish national, a guy named James Murray. And James Murray came to the United States and made a lot of money in the gold mine or the silver mine in Colorado. and then came to California and moved to Monterey and lived in a very fancy mansion down on present-day Cannery Road today. And he built this Celtic cross, and again, there's Mariposa you see right here. So what happened to the oak tree that Mariposa they're supposed to have held mass under? So this is not that oak tree that you see right here. In fact, there was more than one oak tree, probably a couple, and they probably held mass under a canopy of oak trees that you see right there. But those oak trees are very considered sacred and very important. And in the 1840s, the city, it was hit by lightning, and it was pretty well damaged, but it didn't kill it. And then in the 1890s, the city of Monterey was doing some trenching work. I think they were putting in a sewer system, and they cut the roots and they killed the tree at that time. It really upset the priest at the San Carlos Cathedral, Father Mestres. And so he erected a little fence around the tree to try to protect it. And then when that statue of Mariposa was donated to the city sent some city workers down to the property right here to clean it up so they could put the statue in. Well, they didn't know about the tree. They saw the tree and just picked it up and threw it into the bay. And they continued on their work. Well, Father Mestres found out the next day they had threw it into the bay. He was very upset. So he went to his congregation, which was made up of a lot of Portuguese fishermen who were mostly whalers. And so he said, could you go out there and find it? So these whalers went out in their whale boat. They found the tree floating about 25 miles out to sea. And this is the best part. They harpooned it, then dragged it back to Monterey. They set it up behind the church, and parts of are still there behind the San Carlos Cathedral. Then a guy by the name of Harry Green, who was once the mayor of Monterey. Harry Green was a lover of trees. He was actually a guy who founded Arbor Day, also known as Tin Can Harry, because he used to give away little tin cans of tree saplings to kids so they could plant trees. He took pieces of that tree, loose branches and whatnot. They went down to a friend of his, a guy named Otto Sabaru Noda, a Japanese immigrant here in Monterey. Noda actually is the guy responsible for creating the Japanese community here. And Noda had opened the cannery in Monterey, the first cannery on present-day Cannery Row, actually, in 1902, called Monte Fish and Cannon Company. He went down there and he said, maybe you guys could do something with these branches, make some souvenirs that we could sell. So Noda went to his nephew, a young man by the name of Ichiro Noda. Ichiro came from Japan when he was about 14 to work for his uncle. And so his uncle, because he was only 14, sent him to school at that time, thought he'd continue to school, he thought it'd be good for him to learn English. So he sent him to Pacific Grove Grammar School, also Pacific Grove High School. And high school actually recruited him to be on their football team. And we believe he's the first Japanese national to play American football. And so Ichiro took that branches and he created this chair. In fact, he created 3 of these chairs that you see right here out of that oak tree. And at one time, this very chair you see here was exhibited at the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco as part of the Monterey County exhibit at the fair right there. And then 2 of the chairs actually disappeared over the years. Ichiro ended up in New York, went to NYU, and got a degree, and then ended up opening a very successful concession at Coney Island, and actually did very well. And in 1940, returned to Japan and got stuck in Japan when World War II started and wasn't able to return. He did return in the mid 1960s when he was in his 80s, and he came to Monterey, and his one dream was to see these chairs, and they couldn't find the chairs. He talked about these chairs to his family all of his life, and they couldn't find them. And he was very sad about that. And then California State Parks turned up one of these chairs. They had it. And I'm happy to say the chair today is now on exhibit at the Japanese American Sicily Hall Heritage Center, which I'm the curator of. We put it on exhibit there. I'm very happy to have it. But I've also been in touch with the Noda family in Japan. And it turns out that Ichiro has a granddaughter that lives outside of Chicago. And they've never seen this chair, but they heard all about it all their lives. And I was able to send them pictures of it. And they were in tears when they got to see it. So that was a nice thing. So there's Ichiro right there. I'm almost done here, I promise.
Okay.
There's Ichiro right there. And there he is with the high school football team, Civil High School football team, about 1905 or so. And there is the fence to Winneposa Creek right there. And I know I bored you guys too much. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tim. I just wanted to thank you for this comprehensive presentation about the Lower Presidio Historic Park. And I just share your email with everyone else for PayPal donations.
If you have a question about anything, you have any question about Monterey history or anything, especially fishing history, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer them.
And we also have a couple of questions already by Jason Cohen. He's asking, I read that the Fremonts gave Larkin money to buy them a ranch near San Jose, but instead he bought them the Mariposa property. Do we know why?
I don't know why. Larkin did a lot kind of thing. I know Larkin also purchased from the Russian government Fort Ross, but it turns out he never actually paid the Russians for it. And so I think technically the Russians still own Fort Ross. But that was typical of the kind of thing that Larkin would do.
I see. And the second question is, do we know why the British didn't seize Monterey in 1846? I know they had a warship there.
They did, and the British did have eyes on California. They were very concerned, but the British arrived too late. So they arrived about a week after Stockton arrived, and when he got here, there were 4 different American warships in the harbor. And they said that, and although they were a big British warship, they said, no, we're not going to try. So they didn't. That's why they didn't take it.
I see. Well, if anyone else has question for Tim, otherwise we can have also Bill or Inga if they would like to add anything else to this wonderful presentation.
The only thing I would add, Roberto, is that a lot of people, when they come and drive by the area, they think it's the Lower Presidio and it's off limits because it's owned by the Army. But again, these 25 or 30 acres are leased to the city, and that's why we put a big sign right off Pacific Street saying public park welcome. And it's just a great place. You know, if you have friends that are visiting Monterey, especially now with the virus, and it's a place with easy parking, incredible place for a picnic, and great views. So, you know, if you're driving in the Monterey area, be sure to stop by.
Yeah, I highly recommend to go there. It really is the center of the universe.
That's actually a really good suggestion. I never actually been myself to the Lower Presidio, historic Presidio in Monterey, and it looks really beautiful. And anyone else? Any other question for Tim? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly to Tim.
Tim, you said you don't drive. Did I hear that right? How do you get around in Monterey? That's a challenging place without a car.
Well, I used to ride a bike, and then I had heart surgery a couple years ago. So now I take the bus wherever I go. Monterey has an excellent transport system.
I see. As far as we know, did the Yamane forest still exist back then? I mean, was it already relatively deeply forested there, or did the Native Americans have that area cleared out for some other?
No. The early descriptions of Monterey talk about pine forests, particularly going all the way to the ocean, all the way to the beaches, heavily forested. The last real Monterey pine forest still stands in the Pebble Beach area today. Yeah.
Okay, and Inga, would you like to add anything else?
Well, I would just like to say that I do encourage people to bring tours to Monterey, to bring them to the Lower Presidio Historic Park. Currently, the little museum there is closed to the public because of the restrictions due to COVID. In our county, no museums are allowed to be open yet, but we do have a plan for reopening, and one of the ways we can get the word out is through tours like this, through virtual tours. And we hope to do more virtual tours to help share the resources of Monterey. And I did want to say that since you're all tour guides, my sympathies go out to you. We are a tourism-based community, and with COVID, it's been very difficult financially for us, and I imagine it's challenging for all of you as well. So, but we want to stick together and continue to give tours, and this is one of the ways that we can do that. So thank you.
Roberto, one thing I would add is that, as I mentioned to you earlier, Inga's office, working with state parks, has set up cell phone tours. So many of the historic buildings in downtown and the various sites that Tim talked about on Lower Presidio, there's a cell phone number. You call in and they'll give you a 3 to 10 minute presentation on that particular site.
And you won't get
how is it possible to access this this number or this information?
Inga could send you the site, but I mean, when you go up, like we have all these historic signs on the Lower Presidio. At the bottom of the sign, it says, I don't have the number right off the top, but it says call 831 blah, 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 and press 99. And then you get an explanation of that, of where you're set. You know, it will talk about Father Junipero Serra and give you anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes.
Okay, that's very interesting. I could also include this information on the follow-up email with the recording and the brochure, the PDF that I have about the old Monterey Foundation as well. I see there's a question from Allison saying if the buses can fit into the parking lot, but
for sure, we have last year we started, before COVID, we started school tours. So they stop at Colton Hall, where again, as Tim said, the Constitution was signed for California. Then it's a short drive, 10 minutes away. There's plenty of parking. There's so much. This is one of the few places in all of Monterey where there's an excess of parking. And so, yeah, tour buses can easily go there.
That's great. Okay, well, I see Inga included the phone number to access the cell phone tours as well, but I will make sure to include that information with the follow-up email with the resources and recording. I would like to thank you again, Inga, Bill, and Tim, for giving us this presentation today. In particular to you, Tim.
Thank you.
And thanks again, and please be in contact. Let us know when you are able to reopen to the museum and reopen to the public. And we will love to come back to Monterey again. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for listening and joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thanks, Roberto.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.